great. Great, thank you. We had to do some rearranging here tonight because these two gentlemen up on the riser here had to find their best ear. Some of you might know what that means, but my best ear is over here, and Bob's left ear is best ear. Thank you so much for being here. I looked up and saw the two ferns behind me and thought, oh my gosh, this is one of those episodes of Between Two Ferns. I can tell you that while there might be laughter and humor is important in freedom work, that is also very serious work. But a sense of humor and music and food can go a long way. And I think you've experienced this sort of thing tonight in the hospitality given by the Future Democrats. And if you're not a dues paying member already, I encourage you to do that. So a lot of what I heard already from the podium, it's about half of the questions I had for tonight. So this might be a very short event. And but first of all, speaking of music, Saturday was Bob Zellner's birthday, and did you notice all over the country people poured into the streets? And happy birthday, Bob. That's what I heard. Okay, are you ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bob. Happy birthday to you. You know, we need to celebrate small victories all along the way. It's important that we do that. It keeps us together. It keeps us strong. And as I look out on this audience, I'm looking at people that I've worked with in partisan politics for a few years. Bob, just remember my birthday's only 24. And if we could have a similar turnout across the country, I would really appreciate it. We can do a barbecue. That'll draw a crowd. Should we charge for that? We should charge for that. I know that we have a working title for our time together tonight, but there are a few others that I thought might be appropriate as well. And one was two maturing preachers' kids get together to talk about the mischief we enjoyed growing up. Son of a Baptist minister, son of a Methodist minister. But I think we shook hands and said we should never tell those stories.
Some should remain.
They should remain. And I think this microphone might help because you're witty, and I don't want your wit to be lost here in the audience. So should we test that one just to make sure? You're good. We're great. Okay, I saw you with, I thought that was ginger ale. That was white wine. Lightning. I got it. The other title I thought about was two gentlemen of Southern heritage sit for a chat about racial equality and inequity and how deeply rooted systemic oppression has been in our society historically and sadly even today. Thank you. Amen to that? But that's not really why we're here. I have another title, and that's called Called Forward into a Lifetime of Service. This is Bob Zellner. And I would also, for the English majors out in the audience tonight, I would like to make a small amendment to our English nomenclature. Bob Zellner, to me, is not a proper noun. Bob Zellner, to me, and I hope to you, is an active verb.
Well, John Lewis said, when we pray, we move our feet. So you have to take action. And if you have just hopes and dreams, that's just between you and whoever in the universe, but the Bible says hope, faith, and charity, and the greatest of these is charity. You know why that is? Because charity, you have to take an action. You can have all kind of hopes and dreams and faith and belief, but it doesn't mean anything until you take some kind of action.
I like that, and it sets it up for a comment that I might have on occasion, and that is when I hear people say, I really hope, Gary, that this will happen, and I really hope that that might happen. And I'm reminded of what a commanding officer once told me. He said, Gary, hope is not a strategy. Hope is a feeling. In addition to this fascinating life of 60-something plus years in movement work, we are aided tonight by Pamela, who, if you think she's only here to touch Bob's elbow, she has a really long stick that she can reach out and touch mine, so we're happy that you're here. She's known as the CEO of the Zellner Enterprises.
She's the boss.
That's the boss. Now, you heard mention of this book, and I would encourage you to purchase this. Do not loan it to each other. Buy it so that somebody can receive money from it. Buy this book, The Wrong Side of Murder Creek. About 6 years ago, we met Bob at the All Saints Episcopal Church in Mobile, and part of the inscription that I have in my copy of the book, it says, "Tell the story." We'll get to that in a second. The other part that you wrote in there was, if my check didn't clear, Pamela would soon be called. But the key takeaway to that was, tell the story. And you know what? That's important. You'll hear that woven throughout tonight. Thank you. I appreciate that. I need a bigger chair. You know, I don't need this right away. Thank you. I have breath mints for each other if you'd like one.
Those are curiously refreshing.
But why is it important that we all tell the story, that our narrative be woven and shared, and as we relate with others, that we do not forget? Bob, why is this telling the story so fundamental to our success going forward?
Well, that was one of the favorite things that Jim Foreman said, our executive director. Every time we came in from some other adventure, he would say, write it down, take notes, and you need to write your book. So he was always after us to write our book. And we had people like Connie Curry who would help us write our books. And I know after she helped me with The Wrong Side of Murder Creek, she said, that's the last time I'm going to help any Snickfield secretary write their book. So, but we did have help. And it's very important to tell the story because it's a story that is being actively repressed. Hello? See, they can even take out words. So we've tried to get Page and Pallet to be able to keep enough copies because every time you ask for The Wrong Side of Murder Creek, they say, I think we have one copy left. Well, they always only have one copy because once they sell that, they order one more. So I give them a heart attack, and everybody asks for this book, The Wrong Side of Murder Creek, from Page and Pallet, and maybe they'll put 6 in there. At least the first 6 people will be able to get a book. That's a personal commercial there. Please.
No, it's good. Part of telling the story is sharing that printed word, and you've put in printed words something that not only describes a life of service, that active verb that I'm talking about, but you also, page after turned page, inspire people with what they read from that. So I would encourage that, and it's timeless. Sadly, it's timeless. If you'll allow me an indulgence, I'll do a brief flyover. That is, with you growing up as the son of a Methodist minister, you moved every 3 or 4 years as Methodist pastors are reassigned. You grew up in a family full of young men. There were 5 boys in your family.
5 yes.
There were only 4 in our family. I can't imagine what your mother went through. You were uprooted every few years to go to these new communities. You had to make new friends. You had to say goodbye to old friends. You lived in a veritable goldfish bowl of focus. People stare at preachers' kids like none other. They don't care about the vestry members' kids, but they care about the preacher's kids. You're in that focus. You faced bullies in the hallway. You faced bullies in the schoolyard. You developed physical and mental skills at an age in which you probably couldn't even discern what was growing inside you, becoming part of your DNA. You learned to be aware of situations, to develop strategies. You could think several steps in advance. You also used this method to think and to help other people. You could spot trouble from a mile away, and it wasn't always good trouble. When you were at Huntington, you had a good, strong cadre of friends, but when you tried to do research in the community, and I hope you expand on that, you were told by school administration, no, you're not. Stop what you're doing. Not only were they given ultimatum after ultimatum by school administration, but they were followed by the police everywhere they went. Bob, how did these early years shape and draw you toward engagement with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee? I know that's a lot of background, but you know where I'm headed with this.
Yes, I do, and it's really amazing how Gary Moore and I have been crisscrossing in our whole lives, actually, because just about everywhere I was getting in good trouble, he was somewhere close by. But I never thought about that. Maybe
There's something to it.
you weren't part of the trouble, though. You were
I might
just always there.
always there.
He was in Laurel, Mississippi when we had the Gulf Coast Pulpwood Association, and we had big editorials in the Mississippi newspapers. And they had we were organizing black and white woodcutters who were some of the poorest people in the South. And we were organizing a union, and they were together in the union. And that was the way they had strength, because they had always kept the black and white workers separated and battling against each other. And they didn't know what to do when the black workers and the white workers got together. And we had thousands of people going out on strike all over the Deep South in Pulpwood. And International Paper and Scott and Weyerhaeuser, all the Mobile paper companies that needed the pulpwood, all the pulpwood cutters shut down, and they put up picket lines at the wood dealers so that they would not ship any wood to these big places that needed the pulpwood. And they were so puzzled that they did an editorial in the Mississippi paper, and it was a big pile of pulpwood. And at the bottom of the pulpwood was a hammer and sickle. And all of the woodcutters said, they're calling us communists. And I said, well, what do you think about that? They said, well, we looked it up. We read up on it, and I said, as far as we can tell, we are communists, because it says treat everybody equal and pay equal pay for equal work. So they said, I guess we are communists. So we used to be called Klan guys, and now we're being called communists. And I said, well, we were always called communists, and now they think that we joined the Ku Klux Klan. So we had a kind of a union going there that was hard to understand, and it was impossible to stop, because poor people had to cooperate with being poor. And once you decided that you weren't going to be poor anymore, you were going to get together, you begin to get richer.
Well, thank you, Bob. There was one reason that you and I didn't actually see each other when you went to work for SNCC in September of 1961. I didn't graduate from Fairhope High until 71, so that is the only reason I was not around. That is the only, you had a few years head start fund me, but you blazed a trail for us, and you still are blazing the trail for us. You heard our president, Denise, talk about the importance of nonviolent direct action and what this means and how this counters the culture of today to be so harsh and mean and violent toward one another. And if I could touch briefly on some of the philosophy, some of the morality of SNCC. You were trained, you were educated, you were conditioned to work with many different people, Bob, in different backgrounds and personalities, over and over again. But let me point this out. Nonviolence is not a natural human survival instinct. It's not. We are conditioned everywhere in us to respond in a violent way. Boxer Mike Tyson is credited with saying, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. Well, you folks in SNCC actually had a plan. And through these workshops, through this role playing, through this modeling of what was about to happen when you staged sit-ins and had marches, you actually were prepared to do this, even if Mike Tyson said you wouldn't have a plan when you got punched in the mouth. You had a muscle memory. You had this in your psychological psyche. It was sort of like the Gandhi's Hindu satyagraha: courage, nonviolence, and truth. Do you want to talk about a little bit about? You gave us an example with the Masonite strike. You have others in maybe the Montgomery work or Albany. That's Albany, Georgia, but they pronounce it Albany. Or any other place that you have a recollection of?
Well, I remember that I was very lucky that while I was in college, I was a martial arts instructor. So I was trained, and also because I was one of 5 Methodist preacher kids that moved into a new town regularly. Every time you moved into a new town, all the bullies would bully you, and if you fought them, then you only had to do it once, and then you could be friends. But I remember when we moved from Loxley to Daphne, I told my older brother Jim, I said, I'm not going to fight this time. And he said, what do you mean? I said, when the bullies attack me, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to be nonviolent. I was 9 years old. What did I know about nonviolence? So it led me to believe later on, when I studied this deeply, that some people may be hardwired to be progressive, and some people may be hardwired to be the other way. So some people in our family were the other way completely, and I always had a surfeit of empathy. I was a champion empathy person, and it's the opposite of being when you're narcissistic. Yes. So
we don't know anything about that.
If you in SNCC, we had to be humble, and we had to learn how to write regular news stories. We had to learn to use a camera professionally, and we would have in our little student voice. If you wrote an article or took a picture, you always were given a photo credit or a byline when you wrote an article. So, but we were trained that we were not supposed to be self-promoting. We were supposed to be humble, quiet, and they kept reading the Bible verse. Who shall inherit the earth? The people that are powerful and wield chainsaws, cutting off people from their jobs and so forth, or is it the meek? The meek people will inherit the earth, and that's a really hard one to learn.
Well, thank you, Bob. The moral stance and the strategic approach to this can't be understated, and so I hope that you see this thread, this theme throughout the evening. And I was interested in how you could diffuse certain circumstances when there enough to know that the more people in the mob, the more immoral they are. And if you can separate them and single them out maybe one by one, and I remember reading that in your book, that you could actually diffuse a situation by separating people away from that mob and separating them away from the violence that was going on. Didn't always work. You got beat up, but you didn't. It didn't always happen that way.
Well, I didn't always get killed.
Nor once that I know.
One of my main jobs in SNCC was campus traveling, so I would be going to all the different campuses in the Deep South, especially white campuses. And one of my main points was you can do this and not get killed right away. You might be able to work out a few years. And the only way I got to be 86. No, I'm not 86. Yeah, I am.
Seems like it was yesterday.
Saturday. I was 86. And I want to be like Jimmy Carter. I want to live 16 more years. I'll be 101. So I don't want Jimmy Carter to be.
Well, you have a room full of cheerleaders for that to happen, Bob. You know, the transformative aims of all of this is very important too. Not only does it transform the people around us, it transforms us on a daily basis. It's not something that is one and done. It's transformative. Your neighbors. How Bob has built allies wherever he went. I'm not sure that I heard the specific note, Bob, but in the Masonite strike, is it true that you were actually able to have people come together as allies, the African community, working folk, and the KKK? How do you build allies like that without being a great consensus builder? They had a topic, and that was fair wages and fair treatment of the employee. And this gentleman was able to, as an active verb, be able to bring people together, and making allies every day rather than enemies, I think, is one of the key takeaways tonight. And I got to tell you, I'm sort of like Mike Tyson. I don't know if I could respond in that way. You give me encouragement to do that. It's daily, isn't it? It's daily. From the Atlanta office, where you went in September of '61, you've been traveling as a college campus coordinator. I know that had to be very fulfilling for you, and you later became the first white-skinned field secretary for SNCC. That has to be incredible. You organized, you raised money, you created community, you fostered and gained the allies that we just talked about, and you faced threats. And those were the best of times. White civil rights activists faced unique challenges. While black colleagues won the respect of their communities, you and other white Southerners earned undeserved hatred and contempt from your white communities. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, a very quick thought. I thought that when I first started out in the civil rights movement, that all of the black women and young men, I thought they all had the support of their families. But I learned that many times they were the first people in their family to ever go to college. And when they went down to a sit-in and got arrested, their parents were furious. And they said, you're going to have to come home because we sacrificed all this money and all this time to send you to college, and now you have gone and joined that dang movement and went to jail. So we thought that we were being persecuted, and they were being heroes, but they weren't being heroes in their family said, don't do that. And so everybody had to take a big risk to participate in this, but the times were, it was happening. And after Bloody Sunday in Selma, right here in Alabama, within 90 days of the sit-ins and the freedom rides, We had hundreds and thousands of young people across the South and all over the country, actually, mobilized to begin to work on the civil rights movement. We couldn't have our legal rights until we had the civil rights to be allowed to demonstrate. We had to win what the Constitution said we had a right to already, and that was to petition for a redress of grievances. And we did it over and over again, and we were arrested just by protesting. And they're still doing that today. So we're involved in the same movement today that we were 60 years ago. And many of us, being able to live longer, maybe we weren't able to do what we thought we should have done the first time around. But we've lived long enough now so that we can join up, take a risk. When's the last time you were in jail? I mean, maybe you didn't.
Well, it's a perfect segue for my next item.
Do you remember the last time you were beaten up for something you believed in? So maybe you'll have an opportunity to have those thrilling adventures.
Well, the last time I was in jail, there was a 57 Chevy involved. And there might have been one beer or two. I remember two. But this is a great segue for this next discussion. Bob, you were beaten at nearly every demonstration, and you responded nonviolently. You were jailed at nearly every turn, and you suffered horrific injuries before, during, and after incarceration. I remember notes about being jailed in Montgomery, Macomb, Mississippi, Albany, Georgia, Baton Rouge, Talladega, Danville, Virginia. I know there were other times. Do I remember that you were also on a chain gang? Was that in Georgia?
That was in Georgia.
That was in Georgia. And then a sweatbox, was that Baton Rouge?
Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge. Now, is this sinking in? Is this sinking in? I hope it is. And it's not to make you feel bad. It's to encourage you that there is a lot that we can do without being on a chain gang, for example. If it's not too painful to share, can you visit some of those moments while you're in jail? And again, not to make us feel bad that haven't been in jail for those reasons, but to reflect on what it was like then and maybe where we're headed again if we don't act. Are you okay with that, or is that painful?
Well, you know, I have talked to people all over the world who were in terrible, terrible prisons. And most of the people that were in some of these awful prisons have been tortured. But almost everybody who has been tortured in prison, they don't describe what happened to them as torture, but what happened to their cellmate or the person they was arrested with. They were really tortured. So we don't think that we're being tortured when we put in a hot box. And if it hadn't been for African American trustees that brought salt to our cell and gave us salt, if you had to eat salt and drink all the water that you could stand to drink all day, or you would die. And I remember being in the hot box and thinking, how can someone, now they weren't torturing us in order to get any information. They already had all the information, or if they didn't have any information, they made it up. Because you can read the bill of particulars against us in Baton Rouge, and they said that we did with force of arms attempt to overthrow the government of East Baton Rouge Parish, Louisiana. We just brought a toothbrush and some books for Dion Diamond to read because he was under $14,000 bond, and there was no way, that was 3 times our annual budget. We couldn't get him out of jail, so we stopped on the way from Macomb down to New Orleans to visit Dion and tell him we were trying to raise his bond. And they said, you can't see him because end day is Thursday and today is Saturday.
Did you hear that? End day.
Yeah, you can't see him because black prisoners can only have visitors on Thursday. And we said, well, can we leave them a book and some toothpaste? And they gave us a list of things that we could get. So while we went to the drugstore to get that, they organized a posse at the prison. As soon as we got back, they captured us and put us right in the sweatbox. And they weren't trying to get information. They were torturing us because they hated us, and we were trying to get black people registered to vote. Why would you hate someone just by trying to help somebody get the most basic democratic right that Americans have? That was the kind of hypocrisy that we were faced with, and we weren't going to have it. We were not going to cooperate with it, and we realized that segregation itself requires the cooperation of the people of color. And once the people of color said, we're not going to cooperate with segregation anymore, it wouldn't work. It didn't work. We killed them.
Well, thank you. Active verb, I'm just telling you, active verb. Locally, just for means of comparison, I'm asked to do these horrendous things like help people register to vote, take people to the polls, call people on the phone, write a postcard, knock on the door, talk with people about the issues. Let's see. Appearing at a public hearing, or write a letter to my elected official, whatever. I mean, this is exhausting work I've been doing. Do I measure up yet? Am I measuring up? The point, thank you. That's an affirmation. That's an affirmation. Take that. All of those things matter. We're also asked to give financially. We're asked to be allies with one another. We're asked to be friendly with one another. So what we're asked to do in this organization and in others, I realize that you all are nonpartisan. I would like you more if you weren't. But I respect that. I'm kidding. I respect that. But for us to do what we need to do, when you look at what we're asked to do, and asked to do this cheerfully, I hope when you hear the example of these lives here tonight, that you take away a new resolve to be committed in so many ways. And one of those, when we're looking here we are in April, and we've had such a pleasant time since January the 20th. You talked about Ella Baker's belief that we should be digging in for the long haul. Do you have any comments on that, or do we all know what that means? We know we have a long haul ahead of us.
Yes, and one of the recommendations that I make to young organizers and young activists is that they usually are very well educated, and I say that please have a lot of different careers, and make some of those careers giving back for everything that we've been able to have heretofore in this country. And so we need to be able to have families. And one of the things that I really recommend strongly is that when you have children, do not neglect your children for the work that you're doing. And many of us have a lot of guilt because we didn't spend a lot of time with our children. We were so busy, other things, and we didn't realize how important it was to spend time with our own children. And the children are resilient, but they need their mom and dad. So if you get so involved that you can't spend time with your children, you're getting too much involved. So take care of your families, take care of yourself, and live a long time and make a difference.
I've heard that the day that you met the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was sort of a turning point in your life. Do you want to reflect on that a minute? Or do you need a
know, I can talk about that because it was very important. I was in a sociology course at Huntington College, which is our Methodist school in Montgomery. And the whole class of sociologists were given an assignment. And we were assigned to write a thesis or a theme paper on the racial problem and solutions to the racial problem. Now you say, well, that's an unusual assignment for any college in Alabama, but it was in sociology, and the name of the course was Race Relations. So we told our professor that 5 of us were planning to go and interview Dr. King and Miss Rosa Parks and Brother E.G. Nixon, who was the branch president of the NAACP. Because they were the ones that made the Montgomery bus boycott so successfully. And our professor said, you can't do that. And we said, why? And he said, because you'll be arrested. He said, you don't know the first thing about race relations in Alabama in 1959. And we said, that's why we're taking your course. And we know that people have come from all over the world to study right here in Montgomery what happened in the Montgomery bus boycott. And you are telling us that we can't go and talk to the people who made that bus boycott, and all we have to do is drive half a mile over to the other campus? And they said, yeah, you can't do that because you'll be breaking the law, the segregation laws. And 5 of us said, no, we're going anyway. We're going anyway. And we got in touch with Dr. King, and we said, we understand that you're having an all-day workshop at Reverend Abernathy's church on Ripley Street, and next Saturday, and we'd like to come. And Dr. King said, well, you're certainly welcome to come, but he said, you should be prepared to be arrested. And we said, that's what our professor said. And he said, that's why he's a professor. You can't do that in Montgomery. Just willy-nilly go to whatever church you want to go to. You have to go to a white church. And the black people have to go to their black church. And I said, is that in the Bible? And no, it was the opposite of what was in the Bible. And we decided we would go anyway. And strangely enough, we sat under the balcony. There was a balcony in the back of the church, and that's where the undercover police were up there. I didn't think that was a good idea for undercover police to be up there in the balcony for everybody to see. And there was a big recording, Wallensack reel-to-reel recorder, and all of the sermons and the speeches and everything are recorded and then sent straight to George Wallace. So the people in the mass meeting said, since George Wallace is listening, Governor Wallace, I'd like you to know when they just talked right to me. And it wasn't all that respectful. So we had this situation. We went to the workshop, and after the workshop, Dr. King spoke. And it was the first time I ever heard him speak. And it was a mesmerizing sermon. And as soon as he finished his sermon, he walked out of the pulpit and walked right down the aisle to where we were. And he bent over and he said, the church is surrounded. The police are out there. There's photographers. The news people are out there. And they've sent word that the 5 of you are going to be arrested. And we said, oh, goodness, we need to escape. And he said, well, okay, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go out the front, and I'll try to get everybody to come around the front. And Mrs. Parks and Reverend Abernathy can go with you down to the basement, and there's a back door. So if I can get them all to come around the front, Miss Parks can open the door and you can run for it. So that's what our education had come from too, that we were in the basement of the church waiting for the door to open so we could run all out for the black community being chased by our own police. And because overnight we had become outlaws. And by going to a black church, we had stepped over the line, and we were now to be hounded by the police. And when we finally did escape from the church and got back to college, we were met by the whole administration of the college. And they said, you have to resign from Huntington College. And we said, why do we have to resign? They said, because you've broken the segregation laws and brought shame to Huntington College.
Oh.
And we said, well, we were working on our sociology. Don't tell me about no sociology assignment. But we were told that we had to leave, and we were, all 5 of us were expelled, basically. And we were banned from the campus. We were never to return to the campus. So they said, if you set foot on this campus again, you'll be arrested. And the very next time I set foot on the campus, I was arrested by Al Lingo, who was a Ku Klux Klansman that had been appointed to be head of the Alabama Highway Patrol by George Wallace. George Wallace is busy trying to convince everybody that he's one of the worst racists who ever lived. And he was a follower of Big Joe Folsom. How many people will remember Governor Folsom in Alabama? One of the most progressive people we ever had in that office. And he was also a Methodist layman, known to be a liberal and a good judge. And then when John Patterson beat him, he said, I'll never be out-end again. And he set out to become the worst racist, and he wanted Alabama to be known all over the world as a racist state. And for a long time it was. And now, because of EJI, we are now the cradle of freedom, not the cradle of the Confederacy. I forgot that one of the main parts of the story, and it was when Dr. King did go out the front, all the police and the news people ran around there, and Miss Parks was watching out the door, and she said, it's all clear out here, you can go now. And so as we all ran out, she touched me on my left elbow, and she said, Bob, when you and the other students see something you're wrong, you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to decide which side you're on. Not choosing sides is a choice. And I haven't washed that elbow since. But in my opinion, if St. Rosa Parks tells you that you should do something, you better be about the business of getting that done. So that was my commission in the Civil Rights movement. And whoever got sent off by Rosa Parks themselves.
Can you imagine being given an escape route by Rosa Parks and Ralph Evans? I mean, that is phenomenal. So it's an incredible story. And if you don't mind, I have just a brief quote from a letter from the Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King, because I think that introduction was so poignant. You know, that's a short read after your 100th time to read it, because you'll read it that many times. But here's just a brief point. All that is said here, and remember, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was responding to 8 white clergy. And I see some nods on the heads of some of my Episcopal friends who knew the 2 bishops in the Diocese of Alabama, to whom this letter was written to a rabbi in Birmingham, as well as a Roman Catholic faith. It might have even been a Methodist thrown in there. But he's responding to this call for wait. He was told to wait, calm down, don't cause trouble. Here we go. All that is said here grows out of a tragic misconception of time. It is strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time is neutral. It can be used either destructively or constructively. I am coming to feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of good will. We will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men and women willing to be co-workers and partners with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. We must use time creatively and forever realize that the time is always right to do right. Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy and transform our pending national elegy into creative song of brotherhood. Now is the time to lift our national policy from the quicksand of racial injustice to the solid rock of human dignity. So I see in those words a lot of what I've heard from you tonight, Bob, and a lot of what I've read in your book, and a lot of what I know that I will see from our group meeting here tonight. You know, I think we're going to try to have music later on tonight. I know that is important. You heard a wonderful warm-up with the Happy Birthday song. I understand that food, music was, before I get to food, that music was a very unifying element in the movement. I think it's a very unifying element in any setting. Food is also a way to gather. I have a wonderful friend who lives in Mobile and who we asked to join our Commission on Racial Justice in 2017, and she said no. She said, I'm tired of talking about it here, African-American lady. And I said, we need you. She said, until your feet are under the same table as the feet of a person of color and eating the same foods and having conversation, you do not know what the situation is. And until that happens, you're two categories of people. Guess what? She's still one of the biggest fans. She's one of the wisest people I know. And she still puts me off when I ask her to serve on that commission because she knows if she pushes from out here, it's going to work. I know food is important for us. We always have snacks. We always have something liquid to help us. Let me just mention two other things, and we're going to have time for questions from the audience, I hope. One is, and this will come as a shock to everyone, misinformation, outright lies. It's incredible what we face now, but you know what? It's not new. All during the Civil War, certain newspapers, one newspaper would give this slant, another newspaper would give that slant. The news that I was receiving about the work that you were doing, Bob, in the Masonite strike in Laurel, Mississippi, we thought you were murderers, communists. You might have been from New York City.
That's what they call it. They always said you're a Yankee Jew, communist from New York. And I said, wait, I'm not from New York.
I love that. But we're countering that now. Do you have any advice for us on how to counter the misinformation and propaganda? Because a certain group in our country has really honed in on that and they have perfected it.
Well, the only advice I have is to thoroughly investigate. If you're in a county and you're trying to do something in that county, you need to know everything there is to know about the power structure, what are the industries, you need to know everything you can know about the local area. And I can give an example. Because in 1963, SNCC was asked to send some people to Danville, Virginia, because they wanted to have a campaign to integrate Danville, Virginia. So we needed someone to go there and an advanced party to go and scout out the whole situation. And our communications leader, Julian Bond, had a little bit of time, and he said, I'll go and spend a couple of weeks in Danville and check everything out, and I'll write a report about it. So Julian went to Danville, Virginia, and the first thing he did was meet with all of the people who had anything to do with any civil rights up to that point. So he met with all of the local leaders, the preachers, the teachers, some of the people, the union people from Downriver Mills, and they all said, well, Danville is laid out very strictly because of the railroad track. All of the black people live on this side and all the white people live on that side. And you're safe as long as you're on this side of the railroad track. But when you cross the railroad track and you go down Main Street, do not go down Main Street and turn left on River Road. And so he was immediately curious about that. And so he said, why should I avoid that road down there? And they said, well, a lot of people have had terrible experiences down there, and that's where our mental hospital is located down there. And there's a really big, about a 10-foot wooden fence around it. So if you go down there and you see that big wooden fence, don't get close to it. Stay away from that area. And of course, that's the first place that he went to. He went down Main Street, turned left on River Road, and he got out, walked around the neighborhood, and then he saw about 2 blocks ahead of him a big wooden fence, about 10 feet tall. And he said, oh, that must be it. So he went right down there to the fence. And the closer he got, it sounded like he heard lots of voices on the other side of the fence. And they were chanting, 14, 14. It sounded like they were saying 14, 14. So he walked up and down the fence, and right about eye level there was a knot hole, and he could see through the fence, and he couldn't resist, so he put his eye to the fence, to the little knot hole, and he got poked in the eye with a sharp stick. And the pain was so intense that but he could still hear them chanting, 15, 15, 15. That's the kind of stories we would tell.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That touches a little bit on the organization, because even though that was a joke, there was an advance party that would go ahead and make sure that everything was copacetic and learn the history of the environment. So that was part of the organization. And then they also had marshals. Marshals for any demonstration. And their functions, they weren't armbands, and their function was just to keep an eye on everything and make sure everybody was staying cool. And if they weren't, they would intervene and calm everybody down. So there was always people watching what was going on and making sure that it was cool.
Well, it's wonderful. I think that there, I was given a signal that there may be some interesting questions from the audience, and with your permission, Bob, we'll move into that. You think 4? You're going to poke somebody in the eye if we have 5? We'll let that up.
Good evening. Thank you for your service. Just have a quick question. What are your thoughts on the efforts to rewrite or whitewash American history in our schools and in our libraries?
Well, I think that's a very important question. What are we going to do? What can we do about the banning of books, the banning of ideas? They have banned my profession. I teach critical race theory. And now you know that's being outlawed. And in fact, just about every history teacher in the United States, if you talk about the civil rights movement or the settling of this country, you have to talk about the genocide against the indigenous people. And if you talk about the civil rights movement, you have to talk about critical race theory, because almost all of the theories about civil rights comes from the law. And originally, critical race theory was only the purview of lawyers. But now we have learned so much from critical race theory that it's part of the curriculum of any liberal education. And if you're not allowed to have the books and teach those ideas, we have to fight for those. So I think there are some people in the audience that have been investigating a suit against the state of Alabama and the state of Florida under restraint of trade, because we have gone to school for decades and decades to learn to teach about the civil rights movement, and now our profession is being outlawed. And so they are interfering with our profession, and we need to have a class action suit. So we may have some more information on that soon. If anybody has any ideas on it, let us know. And we would include you in the suit against Alabama and Mississippi, making it once again possible to teach about our history.
Thank you. You know, the theme is tell the story. Tell the story, because it's at every turn we're seeing that. What happened today about access to voting rights, access to the ballot. And day after day, we see this. And I think we all know that that the term woke was just another word for the N-word, when that was popular. And then CRT was just another phrase for the N-word. And then it became DEI, was just another phrase for the N-word. So the importance that we started talking about early on, tell the story. We have an obligation, but as Bob just mentioned, we have an obligation to let the professionals, the professors, the clergy, the leaders in the community speak to this as well. Librarians, thank you.
Our Fairhope library did a great job.
Yeah, we have a great local example, though.
And it was national news. Thank you.
Yep. Are there others?
Why do you think you were often singled out for especially harsh and violent treatment?
Why do you think you were singled out for unusually harsh and violent treatment? Am I okay?
Oh, yeah, okay. Why was I or some of the white people singled out for harsh treatment? Well, part of that is that the South has been to graduate school and how to keep dissent down. And it's like the little trickle in the dam. If you have a few students on campus here and there that want to do things that are not allowed, then that is contagious. So one of the reasons they're so hard on the white activists is that they want to make sure that they can stifle that as quick as possible, because they want to live with the belief that all white people are racist. So if you have a few people that are kicking over those traces, you need to squash them as quickly as possible so it doesn't spread.
Thank you.
Yeah, they call you a race traitor. You're supposed to be loyal to your skin color. Isn't that a great idea? That's something to really base a country on. If you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, stick around. But if you're black,
I gotta go back. Is there another? Yes, someone standing with a microphone, so that looks like it's gonna be the next one. And then there are some hands in these. Okay.
How did you continue your activism throughout those years following the early days of the civil rights movement?
Could you repeat?
How did you continue your activism throughout those years following the early days of the civil rights movement?
How did I continue to be active? Well, it's different phases, because when I was working with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, I had sympathy for some of my black sisters and brothers who said to me and other white people in SNCC, you are staying in the comfort of the black community, and you need to go where the problem is most acute, and you need to go organize poor and working class white Southerners. And that was the worst thing that we wanted to do, because those were people that had been shooting at us all the time. And now you're going to go and say, hey, we want to work with y'all. And it was pretty scary too, because one of the first places we went to was Laurel, Mississippi. And before we went there, we went to meet with the head of the AFL-CIO in Mississippi, and to find out what the labor dispute was at Masonite plant in Laurel, Mississippi. And so they told us that it was a union of about half black and half white, and a lot of the white people were in the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, and most of the black people were activists in the NAACP, but they are together on their picket line. So that's where we would go. And so the head of the AFL-CIO said, go on down there, and he gave us the name of a lawyer. And so we went to see the lawyer in Laurel, and he said, well, they need as much help as they can get over there at Masonite. And I'm going to send you over there, and be sure to see a man named Herbert Ishii. Herbert Ishii. Now, the state AFL-CIO guy had told us that there were some really dangerous Klansmen in that union, and the most dangerous one was Herbert Ishii. So the lawyer says, Herbert Ishii is over there waiting for y'all now. So go over there and see him. And so we got back in the little Volkswagen that we were driving in, and we were driving from the lawyer's office over toward the IWA office, and we said, you think we ought to actually go over there? And then we all said to each other, if we're going to do this work, and we can't, the first time we have to go meet with a Klansman, we don't have guts enough to do that. We're in the wrong profession. So we said, okay, we're going to go over there. And we said, we're going to go in there for 30 minutes. And we synchronized all of our watches. And we said, no matter what is happening, we might be dancing the hora in the middle of the room, but 30 minutes, we're going to say goodbye, and we're going to go to our car if we can and get the heck out of there. And so anyway, we went in, and we drove up to the union office, and several people were out front, and they said, well, the executive committee is waiting for you in the back room. And they took us down these hallways in the big union hall, and we went into a room, and there were about 12 or 14 people in there. They were all white. And they introduced us around the table, and the last person they introduced was Herbert Ishii. And he had a cigar box in front of him with something very heavy and metallic in there. And you flip the lid open every now and then, and you see a little revolver sitting in there. And so when they got all the way around the table, and they said, and this is Herbert Ishii, and so I shook Mr. Ishii's hand, and I said, I'm Bob Zellner, and this is Jack Menace, and Bob Lavich, and so forth and so on. We're with the Southern Conference Educational Fund, SCEF, and we all worked for SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And we said, the FBI will be here very soon, and they'll have pictures of all of us, and they'll say that we're dangerous communists, And so we need to tell you right away that we are working to try to get black people and white people to work together, and we want to help out in this strike if we can. And the big guy named Herbert Ishii slammed his fist down on the table and he said, "We need help from wherever we can get it." And he said, "Do you think you're the only one that has trouble with the FBI? They follow us all the time." And so we had something in common there, by the way. And that's what we built on. And we said, we don't care if you're a communist, we don't care if you're a Klansman, we don't care what you think. If you're going to work with the GROW Project, grassroots organizing work, which we also call Get Rid of Wallace, George Wallace. And that's the way we started out. And it wasn't long before we had a 24-hour-a-day picket line around Masonite. And one night some of the workers said, "Zellner, come here, we want to talk to you." And they started walking down this dark little road where somebody had been killed the night before. And it was another time when I wondered, well, maybe I can say I need to go get a cup of coffee or something. And I said, well, I better go on down there with them. And we went down and they said, "We want to talk to you about this communist thing." And I said, "Okay, what about the communist thing?" They said, "Well, everybody's calling us communists." And I said, "Well, what do you think?" They said, "Well, we looked it up, and it does say that everybody is treated equally and equal pay for equal work." And we said, "As far as we can tell, we aren't communists. We didn't know that before, but we must be, because that's what we believe." And so none of the propaganda would do any good, because they had all been called Klansmen and dismissed because of this, that, and the other. And now we were going to get together and really work together. And the idea that we could do that in Laurel, Mississippi, and we wanted to show the rest of the movement that you can organize poor and working class white Southerners into coalitions with organized black people. And that's what we have to do now in order to save our country. And we've gone this far, and we can't come this far and be let go. We have to finish the job. Last question.
Yes, sir. I was wondering, well, it's more or less a question from a friend of mine. She texted it to me. She wanted to know, during the hardest parts of your service, how did you keep going? How did you not give in to despair and to the things that just felt too much sometimes? How were you able to keep going?
Okay.
Is that clear?
Yeah, how was I able to keep going? Well, you get different, as you get older, you do different things. And when I first started out, I was organizing and doing nonviolent workshops. And after I did a year's graduate work at Brandeis in sociology, and then I did PhD work at Tulane in history. And by that time, I was qualified to be a teacher, and so I became an adjunct history teacher at Long Island University in South Hampton, New York, in eastern Long Island. And that's a situation where you had some of the richest people around the world living right next to some of the poorest people, the Shinnecock Nation. And that was a situation where they had a reservation of 3,500 acres, and all during the years, the white people had taken a few more acres here and a few more acres there. They were down to 800 acres. And well, I keep going because I'm always inspired by a different kind of thing. And when I started working with in Southampton, one of the first things that I was invited to go to was a Klan rally. And I said, you mean they're having a Klan rally anywhere around here? They said at the Greenhaven Mall, the Klan is going to rally. And so we organized about 400 or 500 people, and there were only about 4 or 5 Klansmen, so we outlearned. And then I learned something about the Northern police. They were not very smart because they said, apparently the Klan did not show up. And there's 5 Klan cars right in front of me with decals on the side, lightning bolts, every kind of right-wing symbol that you could imagine. And the people in the car were mean looking, you know. And I said, well, what about these cars here? You see this one decal was a robed Klansman with a baseball bat. And I said, what do you think that means? They said, oh, we thought that was a ninja symbol.
Which might be good news for the rest of us.
I think you have to keep going until the job is done, and the job
Amen.
is not done yet.
Amen. That's it.
Okay. I would like for everybody to go back against the wall, and we're all going to sing "We Shall Overcome" with right over left, the way we used to sing it in the olden days. So everybody go, and we're going to make a big circle all the way around. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk